Morning, everybody. Welcome to Cabinet. First, welcome. As usual, remember we're being broadcast live via the website and archived, so you can view it afterwards. Microphones on when you speak and off when you've done. Under apologies, we've got Trevor Pendleton, who's cruising, and Byron Rhodes, who's off ill and should be back next week. Agenda item 1 is the minutes, pages 3 to 19. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on 17th of December 2019 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. All agreed? Super duper. 2, urgent items, none. 3, declarations of interest. Blake.
Just the usual preemptive on item 6, provisional medium-term financial strategy, anything in relation to passenger transport or, moreover, taxis. I have a personal interest, non-prejudicial. Thanks.
Good. No others. Agenda item 4, Leicestershire's policy on admissions to mainstream schools, determination of admission arrangements, pages 9 to 74. The report concerns some minor changes to our school's admission policy and some amendments to catchment areas in Whetstone, Countersthorpe and Ashby. Jane Moore, the Director of Children and Family Services, will present the report, and then Ivan Old will speak. Jane?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So the report advises Cabinet of the outcome of the consultation on the revised Leicestershire School admissions policy and also changes to several primary school catchment areas, and to seek approval for the refreshed Leicestershire School admissions policy, the oversubscription criteria and the associated admission schemes for first-time admissions. So just by way of very brief background, the Leicestershire's current admissions policy was agreed by Cabinet in February 2017. And whilst waiting for the new National Admissions Code, steps have been taken to ensure that the Leicestershire policy remains as up-to-date as possible and relevant to schools under the local authority's control. So in relation to proposed policy changes, the only significant change proposed to the current admissions policy relates to the oversubscription criteria, which are used to rank and allocate school places, and the local authority is seeking to remove the current criteria from the oversubscription criteria that relates to pupils basing their application on religious belief to voluntary controlled schools. In addition, it's proposed that the wording under the criteria number 6 is revised to reflect that the local authority is no longer the admitting authority of higher or upper schools in Leicestershire. The Council did undertake a consultation exercise on the proposed changes, and the results of that are set out in paragraphs 24 to 29. In relation to the proposed catchment area changes, there are a number of these. The first one is in Whetstone, where it's proposed that the current catchment area for Badgerbrook Primary in Whetstone is amended to exclude the future Whittle housing development in order to ensure that the school isn't overburdened. In Countersthorpe, it's proposed that the whole development of the Gillan Butts catchment has equal catchment rights, and that will ease the pressure on Thistley Meadow Primary School and offer an alternative choice at Greenfield Primary. In Ashby, it is proposed to dissolve the catchment lines between all primary schools in Ashby de la Zouch, and this means that in Ashby Town there'll be a single catchment area with 5 primary schools within that catchment area. So as I've said, we did consult on the changes as well to the school admissions policy, and we set out the consultation and responses to that consultation in paragraphs 23 to 29. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Ivan?
Thank you, Leader. In moving the motion on the Green Order paper, I'll draw Cabinet's attention to paragraph 24 and the underwhelming number of responses, i.e. only 60. So I don't think that we're dealing with anything here which is at all controversial. I think if it had been, there would have been a much higher number of responses than we've currently got. And I am satisfied that the key paragraph for me in the report is paragraph 30, which says, in order to manage admission applications, it is important that the Council's admissions policies are coherent, that parents understand how they are applied, and that they remain fair and are applied consistently. And therefore I move the motion on the Green Order paper.
I'm happy to second it. In particular, the one in Ashby seems entirely logical to me, because it's hard to know where you can go because everybody lives in the same town. Anybody else to speak? All in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 5, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. This is on pages 75 to 78. This report seeks our agreement for the Council to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism, which was developed by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Again, Jane Moore, the Director of Family Services, and Zafir Salim, Head of Communities, will talk us through the report. And then I was going to speak first, but Louise Richardson will speak first after me. After you, Jane or Zafir.
Thank you, Leader. By way of introduction and background, the actual definition is set out in paragraph 1 there, which is hopefully easy to follow and comprehensive. The definition itself was adopted formally by UK government in 2016. Since then, it's been adopted widely, including by around 200 or so local authorities around the country, plus our partners within the police, CPS and the judiciary. Locally, the majority of local authorities in the LLR area have adopted the policy. We have examined our own hate crime strategy and policy documentation, which is reasonably comprehensive and actually does cover all the equality protected characteristics, including religion. However, there is no conflict between adopting this particular definition and our existing strategies and policies, and indeed we think it'll enhance it and complement that. So on that basis, officers would recommend the adoption and also formally notifying the Secretary of State for the adoption, because he has contacted all local authorities seeking confirmation.
Thank you, Zafir. Louise?
Yes, I'm happy to move this recommendation. The Council takes their delivery of the requirements for the Equality Act very seriously, and we're always working to improve both in the workplace but also wider in the community. And hate crime is something that against anyone for any reason should not be acceptable, either in the county or nationwide. As we've heard, other local councils, the NHS, the police, and us, we've all input into the hate crime strategy, and as such, adopting this definition just supports the work we're doing on equality in general.
Very good. I'll second it. I mean, there's no conflict with our policy, which we've already got, which is fairly comprehensive, but when you use the words enhance it, I'm perfectly happy to enhance it further. Were you wanting to speak, Ivan? Your light's on. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Provisional MTFS 2021 to 23-24, pages 79 to 316. This is our MTFS proposals for the next 4 years, following its consideration by overview and scrutiny bodies in January. The Cabinet is asked to agree that the proposals are submitted to full Council at the meeting on the 19th of February for approval. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to respond to the consultation on the MTFS, and in particular overview and scrutiny committees and the scrutiny commission, whose comments are given in Appendix O to the report. Young Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, will introduce the report, and then because Byron is absent, Richard Shepherd will lead on it. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Leader. One caveat before I start, actually, is that we've not actually received the final settlement yet. That is due kind of middle of next week, but we're not really expecting any changes from it. So I think this will end up being the MTFS that will be taken to County Council. Mm-hmm. There are a few changes to the budget that was issued for consultation in December, and these are set out in paragraph 16 of the report. I'm not going to go through them in any great detail, just to say that any kind of increases in resources have been more than offset by any by increases in cost and demand. So in terms of the overall position, the budget is balanced for the next 2 years, and thereafter in years 3 and 4 it opens up to a deficit of 39 million by year 4 of the MTFS, and I'll come back to that in a few moments. Cabinet is well aware of the significant cost and demand pressures being faced by the County Council. In terms of the key ones, I suppose they relate to the living wage, children's social care and SEN. And within that kind of list, the major pressure is really SEN. In terms of the overall deficit from SEN, we're expecting that to kind of be a cumulative deficit of £19 million by the end of next year. And the council does have a very comprehensive plan to address that. But I think there's no doubt it also does require some reform at a national level from government in terms of how the whole system operates, and also some extra funding from the government as well. And that issue is being faced by nearly all upper tier authorities, with significant pressure through the country. In terms of savings, there's £24 million of identified savings in the MTFS, and that's on top of the £210 million that's been made since 2010. And if you include the 39 million gap that I mentioned earlier and SEN, we expect the savings in the order of £80 million will be required over the next 4 years. Council tax is unchanged from the December report, 2% increase in council tax and 2% in terms of social care levy, giving a total of 4%. I mentioned the 39 million gap, and as a leader has pointed out to me regularly, that the only certainty we really have over funding is next year. So the gap is really our best estimate of both future funding and spending pressures. And in terms of funding, I suppose there's a huge amount of uncertainty. Next year alone, we've got the spending review, we've got business rate retention, and I think most importantly, we've got the fair funding review. And really, our future prospects do really hinge on the outcome of that review. That is the key issue. I'm going to break convention, actually, end with a few positives. Yeah. So, despite being the lowest funded county council in the country, the budget does balance for the next 2 years, and that is without any fixes. So there's no one-off use of resources, no use of capital receipts. So it is a balanced budget. There is a significant capital programme of 607 million, and that is the largest ever, including investment in transport, schools, things like new dementia unit, and 16 million on climate change mitigation, including a solar farm. And that capital programme also doesn't include any extra external borrowing, and that really reflects the strength of our balance sheet and some of the tougher decisions that were made early on in austerity to get ourselves in that position. The final thing I'll mention, and it's kind of buried in the report, is the fact that the business rate pool is going to continue for the next year. And if you look back to 2013-14, since that time, we've actually retained £32 million within Leicester and Leicestershire to be spent on kind of various capital infrastructure projects. The recommendations are set out in the Green Order paper.
Thank you. In the absence of Byron, Richard?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. And could I first of all formally move what's on the Green Order paper? And also, I'd like us all to acknowledge the amount of work put in by Byron over the years on our finances, and I'd like to thank the officers for their hard work, and our scrutiny colleagues too for their input. Chris has clearly outlined to us the situation that we're in, including this remarkable break from convention in the past, that we actually have some good news for a moment to report. I really do, however, need to underline, because it really can't be said too often, about the financial challenges we face. Yep, there is some good news, let's be grateful for that, but we still have these enormous challenges, and we're all labouring under the difficulty of lack of clear information about the future, quite frankly. I mean, trying to put together a 4-year MTFS with what we know is a challenge. We're directing, as you know, some resources to key areas like social care and SEND, and also some more for highways, which have really suffered over the past few years. There's the capital investment that Chris mentioned in essential infrastructure, schools and roads. Population's increasing. They need that, we need that. And we're doing our best to maintain the council financially through things like the investment fund, the CAIF, and social care accommodation. And as Chris said, looking at environmental measures. And again, here's the good news bit, which Chris mentioned. Due to the management of financial resources, we can find a bit of leeway in the MTFS, so we can give some money to invest in priorities identified by the public and by scrutiny. Got to tread carefully here with challenges ahead, but there's £100,000 for Leicestershire grants, so we can support communities and deliver local projects. There's 75,000 for the Scams Intervention Project. We're all, I think, painfully aware of the effect scammers can have, particularly on the vulnerable. So that extra money, I think, is welcome to recognise the work that team does to try to prevent financial abuse, and 130,000 to cancel that proposed reduction in opening hours of our recycling and household waste sites. That's another piece of good news. So, Chairman, having said that, I have formally moved the item on the Green Order paper, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, and I'll formally second and also place on record my thanks to Byron, who can't be here today, but I'm assured he's watching us on the webcast from his sickbed. And also, while I'm on it, Chris, thanks to your work, and of course to Declan, who does as much as you down there. I think without your expertise, would be in a very difficult position, because, as you say, this is the best estimate we can come up with in the absence of further information from the government. And I mean, apart from the areas you've identified, areas of risk, we've also got, I've just written down 4 other areas of risk. So we've got a planning white paper coming from the government, which we've had no idea what's in it. We've got devolution white paper. Again, we've no idea what's in it. We've got the review of new homes bonus. Again, we don't know what they're going to do with it. And then another one, we've got the housing infrastructure fund review. So instead of having a plethora of them, there's going to be one big one, but we don't know what's in that either. So I think we've done pretty well to come up with a balanced budget for 2 years, and on that basis, I'm happy with it going forward. The only thing that I'd mention in passing is that if we can, we ought to, in the future, be looking to see if we can find some more money for flooding and the flood team. I mean, I know you don't know them particularly because you deal with the money, but they're a bit overworked down there. So moved and seconded. Are we all in favour of it? Great, thank you. John. 7, commissioning and procurement of home care services post-November 2020, pages 317 to 354. It sets out our proposals for the new home care service, which it is hoped to be commissioned jointly with the CCGs later this year. Adults and Communities Overview Scrutiny Committee had a report on this recently, and its comments are attached to your order paper marked 7. John Wilson's with us today. He's the Director of Adults and Communities. He will present the report, and then I'll ask Richard Blunt to speak, as he's the member with responsibility. John.
Thank you. So the Council currently commissioning over 20,000 hours of home care for over 2,000 people every week. And in order to undertake this task, it's clearly a very complex task, and we've undertaken detailed analysis to determine how best to deliver the service once the current Help to Live at Home contracts end in November 2020. As you said, the proposals in the report have been produced jointly with East and West clinical commissioning groups and have also been informed by independent analysis through Care Analytics. That analysis has concluded that the current lead provider model has not worked particularly consistently or effectively in meeting local demand, particularly in rural areas. That the current contractual lots are breaking up natural operating areas and providing difficulty, therefore, for providers. That the current pricing doesn't align to actual costs based around geographical constraints and travel times, etc. And that we need a differentiated urban and rural pricing across Leicestershire to ensure that we have sufficient capacity going forward. So the key objectives of the new service will be to continue to develop a service that supports people to live independently, to try to achieve a smooth transition to the new service and minimise the impact on service users and care workers of the transfer of service, and to create a more sustainable, flexible and reliable service going forward. The service will be based on working with a number of providers of varying sizes, using a pricing model that reflects their true operating costs. There'll be 4 pricing levels in the new service, based around urban rates, which are for providers who have concentrated demand, particularly in the towns and clusters of villages with good travel routes. Fringe rates for more isolated towns and villages, but again, those that are well connected. rural rates for areas that are reasonably accessible by car but require longer travel times between visits, and those isolated and hard to reach areas. The indicative recommended prices for each of those bands are stated at paragraph 39, but it is indicative at this stage only, and we are doing further market testing with providers to ensure that those rates are sustainable for them. Paragraph 44 outlines the potential additional cost to the council of implementing the new pay rates. And it's worth bearing in mind that although the new pay rates will be an additional cost to the authority, they will provide a more sustainable pay rate going forward. The new provider model dispenses with the role of lead provider within the current contracts, and instead there'll be a central brokerage function within the council to allocate packages of care. We're looking for two forms of provider in the new contract: prime providers, who will be expected to pick up the majority of care packages available within their appointed zones, and supplementary providers, who would be offered packages of care that can't be placed with prime providers. But it's worth noting again that both prime and supplementary providers will have a contract directly with the county council rather than requiring subcontracting arrangements. In the proposed service, there will be a total of 14 zones, each having 2 or more prime providers. Prime providers in one zone can be supplementary providers in another zone, and there'll be no restriction on the number of supplementary providers per zone or across the county. Paragraph 51 details the zones that we're identifying, the 14 zones that we're identifying, and they're further detailed in appendices A to C. And you'll see that there are 6 large zones, 3 medium zones, 3 smaller town zones, a rural zone, and what we're calling a rural free zone. The rural free zone in the Harborough district will not have a prime provider as such, but we will encourage as many providers as possible to deliver care in that particular area. It's recognised, of course, that the success of providers in delivering care is highly dependent on them being able to retain and recruit a skilled and motivated workforce. And successful bidders will need to provide assurance that they either have that already in place or have a realistic, workable plan to recruit and train staff prior to any mobilisation of new contracts. In summary, the proposals for the new service aim to address the key concerns with the current service model. By presetting the price levels, we're trying to ensure that bids for work will be assessed purely on the quality of the care and try to remove the risk of receiving unsustainable low bids. We want to place control of the allocation of packages of care back with the authority to provide a more balanced operating model and to be able to incentivise providers to deliver quality services. And by trying to ensure that providers can pay a real living wage and travel costs, we aim to create a more sustainable workforce and reduce turnover in the sector, which has a big impact on quality.
Sounds good to me, John. Rich?
Well, John's given you a very detailed explanation, and I think he needed to, because this went wrong last time for us. The Help to Live at Home didn't work. There's no reason why we can look back in hindsight and understand why it didn't work, but we have spent the last 4 years correcting it to make it work, and then this is what happens after that. You've heard how complex it is. I mean, we don't even know whether it's going to get signed off by our colleagues, so it still remains with some question marks over it. But this is the best that we can do, and I think paragraph 39, the urban rate, the fringe rate, the rural rate, the isolated rate, going from £18 to 26, just indicatively, gives you a feel about it. I think the other bit, which John didn't mention, but because it was too much to mention, is we rather went on boundaries before, on district boundaries, on all sorts of things that are on a plan. But actually, when you looked at the reality on the ground, we sort of rubbed out all the lines and done it just on the nature of each area. So this is a very good way forwards. It doesn't guarantee success, but the chances of success are much greater than the previous scheme. So I'm really pleased with it. A lot of work's gone into it. It's the type of stuff that John does week in, week out, and it's always appreciated because it's how we should do it. It's a very important service. And I'm happy to move recommendations which are on page 4 and on page 5.
Great. Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Good to see recommendation 3, which will cover the clinical commissioning group changes to their governance that's going on at the moment in the county and city, so I think that's good to see there. And as always, a thorough report from scrutiny, which covers all the points and that the fact they were assured with the work you're doing, so happy to second.
Okay, we've no other speakers, John, so all in favour? Thank you. Agenda item 8, Fair Outcomes Policy for Adult Social Care, 355 to 368. Seeking our approval for the policy, essentially an update of the Council's existing cost-effective care policy with a number of clarifications and improvements. John's going to introduce it again, then I'll call Rich. John?
Thank you. As you say, this is just an update to an existing policy, so I shall be fairly brief. The Fair Outcomes Policy updates the existing cost-effective care policy, which was introduced in 2015. The policy has been revised and updated to better reflect the application of the policy in practice. The particular changes that we want to note are highlighting that a person's well-being is paramount to decision-making around packages of care, that all decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis, that the existing position that there is no cap on the cost of care and that personal budgets will not be reduced to meet defined levels of expenditure will be maintained, that higher cost care options are not necessarily better, nor lower care options worse in achieving good outcomes for people. The inclusion of carers, which was omitted in the first policy, and just retitling the policy to better reflect the intention of ensuring fair outcomes. In the interest of ensuring that staff and stakeholders were able to express views, the draft policy was made available on the County Council's website during December and into January, and feedback is at paragraph 16, and that's been incorporated into the revised draft. Thank you.
Rich? Thank you, John. This is a lot of words about what happens every day in adults. It's just a matter of explaining how we put money and care together, how you manage those two things. It always seemed odd to me that we were being forced to make savings at the same time as attempting to improve our service. And this really, in many, many words, is saying that. And I think that the bit that John highlighted on paragraph 14, the person's well-being is paramount to decision-making for care packages. That's what you'd all expect to say. But then it goes on to say, we'll only consider costs once care needs and well-being considerations have been met. That's what you would expect a caring organisation to do. But a cynic out there might think it's all about the money. And that actually, this really, in particularly those paragraphs in paragraph 14, show all the time how we're blending together the cost implications and the care implications. It's very dry in terms of words, but actually, in reality, it sums up what adults are about here in Leicestershire and why we're on budget. And I'll move recommendations on page 5, please.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Richard. Lee?
Yeah, happy to second, Chair.
No other speakers? All in favour? Thanks, John. 9, Leicester and Leicestershire Strategic Transport Priorities for the years 2020 to 2050, pages 369 to 412. This item seeks our approval to consult on the draft Leicester and Leicestershire Strategic Transport Priorities. Sets out where the city and county can work together, particularly around tackling poor air quality and the effects of climate change, alongside support for the local economy and jobs. We have somewhat lengthy comments from Max, Labour spokesman on the Environment and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. These are attached at the order paper marked 9, and I think you'll have a go at trying to answer them, will you, as you go through. If you miss anything, you'll just write to them, I presume, won't you? Because they are quite detailed. So Anne, who's the Director of Environment and Transport, will present the report, and then Blake, who's Cabinet Lead, will speak. So Anne, have a go.
Thank you, Leader. The report seeks approval to go to consultation on this draft document, which is appended to your papers. It has been developed between ourselves and the City Council as the two local transport authorities for the city and county, and covers to the period to 2050, so it is a far-ranging document. It sets out our transport priorities to meet the challenge of housing and economic growth, as the Leader has alluded to, and so supports the Leicester and Leicestershire Strategic Growth Plan, which again looks out to 2050 with our growth aspirations. It sets out a number of aims about how we would seek to achieve that transport investment, and includes such things as improving our connectivity, addressing the impact of and adapting to climate change, really high on the agenda there, improving public health in doing that, and also improving air quality, amongst other things. The document provides a framework. It is a high-level document. This is not about giving the detail about every bit of transport investment and infrastructure we think that will be required to 2050. This is about the framework of which that future study work will hang. That detailed work will come through both our own local transport plan and the city's local transport plan. Both authorities are looking to provide a refreshed and updated local transport plan over the coming year, as well as the transport evidence that will support the local plans that the districts put in place, as their timetables come round for that work. If approved for consultation, the consultation will start on the 17th of February and go on till late May. And as part of that, we will go both to the Environment and Transport Scrutiny Committee and to the Members' Advisory Group overseeing the Strategic Growth Plan work as part of that. And we would bring back the final document with the results of the consultation, summer, either early or late summer, to Cabinet. In terms of Mr Hunt's comments that he makes and concerns he raises, I'll address just a few if it's all right, but I think the key thing I would say is we'd want to very much submit this and take it as part of the consultation exercise to consider it more fully in the evolution of the final document, if that's all right,
I think that's
Leader.
probably beneficial, Anne. So if you write to him,
Yes.
and then assure him that we're going to take it as part of the consultation, because he has done a lot of work on it. It is quite detailed for you to try and trot through now. So if we just say on record, it'll form part of the consultation, and you'll write to him on any individual points you think require replying to, then you don't need to go through it now.
Fine, I will certainly do that. I'll undertake to write to Mr Hunt, confirm that we'll take his points on board as part of the consultation, and go back in any particular pertinent points we feel able to at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Anne. Blake?
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, I'll move the motion on the Green Order paper under 9, both A and B. We note Max's comments, and I think it's a good strategy to take as part of the consultation. Just if I may comment on the point is made regarding specific actions. I think you've already identified that this particular document does not intend to lay out specific actions that are going to be taken in localities. They'll be left for local transport plans at both authorities and emerging work through the Strategic Growth Plan, and will be informed obviously by transport assessments that accompany the planning applications of those particular projects and initiatives. That's my understanding. In terms of the need for the document, I support the need for the document. We have the Strategic Growth Plan. There are implications when it comes to transport and infrastructure arising from that, and I think this document sets out our knowledge and our understanding of what we need to do in the long term to address some of those issues. Also, the government's spoken about levelling up investment across the country when it comes to transport and infrastructure. Infrastructure is welcome, and we're doing quite well here in Leicestershire at bidding for infrastructure. Melton Relief Flow, for instance, we've put a bid in for the A511. But what's desperately needed is an increase in funding for maintenance and the revenue of the existing infrastructure. We can build new infrastructure, but unless we're maintaining to the optimal level the existing infrastructure, that new infrastructure is going to have minimal impact. So I'm pleased that the government have noted that there's a need to level up funding across the country. Hopefully this particular strategy, once it's been consulted upon and adopted, will help us continue to press that case. But in the meantime, I'll just move the motion on the Green Order paper. Thank you, Leader.
Sure, and I'll second it. And to reiterate what you said, we are successful at bidding, but bidding doesn't half cost a lot of money and time just to get the blooming bids in. So government need to appreciate that. I also think I was did Blake's job when we did LTP3, and it is essential we do have a local transport plan. It's essential that we work with the city, because you can't have a local transport plan where a huge city sits in the middle and ignore it. So it's very important we work with the city. And also I like the way you're going to consult with the MAG, and obviously Trevor Pendleton is the chairman of the MAG. He does strategic planning on my behalf here, so it'll be really useful. So I'm happy to approve this for consultation, seconding what Blake has said. We have no other speakers. Shall we vote on it? All in favour? Cheers, Anne. 10, Barwell Sustainable Urban Extension Planning Application. This is on pages 413 to 418. It concerns the Section 106 developer contributions for the so-called SU at Barwell. We've got comments from David Bill. These are attached marked 10. If you can't, again, address them in your presentation, just write to him. We've got Anthony Cross, who's our head of law. He will present the report, and then it'll be me. Anthony.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet. It's just a short good news report, effectively, following the rather darker news we had reported to you in your December committee about problems we were having with this major Section 106 in connection with the Barwell SU. Although I've prepared the report, it's largely been prepared by Nick Thomas, and he will take you through it.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, so this item was brought to Cabinet on the 17th of December, and at the time we advised that the County Council wasn't able to sign the Section 106 agreement because it had become substantially out of date. Cabinet asked for a report to be brought back to this meeting. I'm just happy to run through some of the updates since that time. Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council has reported the County Council's position to its Planning Committee meeting on the 7th of January as part of a major projects update. The concerns have been shared at officer level at a meeting on the 14th of January. Updated consultation responses from the County Council services have been provided to Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, and we're assuming that has now been shared with the developer. And finally, to note, a meeting has been scheduled for next Monday, the 10th of February, and that will be with the developer and the County Council and the Borough Council, where we will run through what needs to be done to bring the planning application up to date. The intention is now to work with the Borough Council and the developer, hopefully update the transport, education and other requirements with a view to ensuring that the Section 106 agreement is hopefully signed off later this year. You'll see from the recommendation that the final agreement will need to be approved by the Director of Law and Governance, and that will follow consultation with the relevant Cabinet members. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Relatively good news, because in my view it's essential. It's essential we get our money, otherwise we can't provide the essential infrastructure that's required for this development. And also, if we can't get that and can't sign it, Hinckley and Bosworth don't get the housing through the door, which they also need. Anyway, I'll move it, and then I'm going to call Ivan.
Okay, thank you, Leader. I'm happy to second this, and I'm very pleased to hear the more optimistic tone that's just been outlined to us by our officers. I will be even more pleased when we know that the meeting with the developer has come out with the sort of outcome that we actually need. But I will support the motion on the green order paper.
That's great. No other speakers. Moved by me, seconded by Ivan. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you for your work, you two. Next item, items referred from scrutiny, none. Next item, urgent items, none. That concludes the meeting. Thank you.